The war in Ukraine has seen some unexpected twists and turns, and one of the defining moments was when Russia began to lose control of the situation. Despite initially appearing to have the upper hand, Moscow's military strategy suffered major setbacks, as Ukraine not only held out but also recaptured key areas. So what prevented Russia from achieving its strategic goals? Let's take a look at the factors that led to Russia's defeat in the war. War's new phase. Every move escalates the battle, from Russia's destructive airstrikes and ruthless northern advances to Ukraine's ferocious counterattacks fueled by a historic $95 billion in US funding. How far will Putin go? Can Ukraine suffer more? Time to untangle the strategic gambits and geopolitical moves to see why this war is far from done and what it means for global stability. Talking about war's key participants usually involves two perspectives, one from each side. We can't adequately analyze the Russo-Ukrainian war's recent escalation without addressing Ukraine's Western friends. The most important cause of the present escalation is Russia's insatiable ambition to bring Ukraine to its knees, which has led Moscow to use any measures required to achieve its goals. Since these behaviors determine the conflict's trajectory and escalation, it's sensible to start here. Ukraine and its Western allies are mostly reacting to Russia's aggression and preserving Ukraine's sovereignty, making its escalation reactionary. How has Russia escalated the Ukraine conflict? Better question, what hasn't Russia been doing? Russia has expanded its military, psychological, and economic aggression on Ukraine in the first few months of 2024, escalating uncertainty, cruelty, and disaster. Russia escalated the battle due to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the lack of US military aid. Republican opposition to President Joe Biden's $60 billion Ukraine military aid request reduced US help to Ukraine in the first 4 months of 2024. This disagreement stems from two GOP stances. One is that the US has given Ukraine enough and must help it end the war. Two, that the US borders must be secured before sending or spending money abroad, as some conservatives say. President Biden signed a $95 billion military aid package in April 2024, including $61 billion for Ukraine and $1 billion for Gaza, ending this long and difficult debate in Congress. Ukraine received $1 billion in military aid immediately after signing the aid agreement, with more installments planned in the coming months. While Ukraine begged for life-saving air defense systems, Russia savored its overwhelming air superiority, hammering the country's defensive positions with deadly glide bombs. Russia's fortunes changed. Despite its weak air defenses, Ukraine shot down 73% of Russia's glide bombs in 2023, exploiting weaknesses and escalating conflict. A new Middle Eastern conflict has diverted global attention and resources, hindering efforts to resolve Ukraine's crisis. Amid this distraction, Russia exploited Ukraine's vulnerabilities. In May 2024, Russia reopened a northern front in Kharkiv Oblast, 2 years after abandoning it due to heavy losses. This surprise offensive involved over 2,000 Russian troops on the front line, with more in reserve, targeting two locations, Liptsi, 17 km north of Kharkiv, and Vovchansk, 29 km east. Russia quickly seized 9 villages in the first 2 days. Ukrainian officials had warned that Russia stationed 35,000 soldiers north of the border before the attack, and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov confirmed Moscow's intent to capture Kharkiv, aiming to create a sanitary zone to protect Russian settlements near the border. However, President Zelensky stated that Russia's goal was not just territorial gains but also to demoralize Ukrainian forces and create psychological pressure. Russia made some progress on the front lines, including Chasiv Yar and Avdiivka, but these advances were short-lived. By June 2024, Ukraine had largely stabilized the north, bringing an end to the Kharkiv Oblast offensive, thanks to critical support from its Western partners. Yet, Russia's summer 2024 offensive is expected to be one of the bloodiest of the century, marking an escalation of its aggressive tactics. Between March and April 2024, Russian strikes increased by 17%, with the majority focused on Donetsk and Luhansk in the Donbas region. The offensive intensified in June, with Russia making tactical gains in Toretsk-Holivka after heavy attacks. In preparation for this summer's offensive, Russia plans to draft 300 additional soldiers. Despite claims of a volunteer surge, Putin's push for more troops signals Russia's readiness to escalate further. even at the cost of significant casualties. This increased mobilization indicates that Russia is willing to sacrifice vast numbers of lives to achieve its objectives, making this conflict one of the deadliest in recent history. Figures of loss. The Ukrainian General Staff reports 551 Russian troops lost between March 1st and May 1st. The number of lost servicemen grew by 38940 in May alone, demonstrating the conflict's escalation and terrible toll on Russian forces. Although June estimates are not yet available, Russia lost another 2,000 soldiers by June 18th, indicating a worrying fatality rate. Since the invasion, approximately 538,000 Russian soldiers have died due to a tyrant's power grab. If Putin is willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of soldiers, you can assume he doesn't care about Ukrainian life. Both soldiers and citizens are involved. Putin's ruthlessness is shown by Russia's intensified targeting of Ukrainian civilians. Due to Russia's missile and bomb attacks on populated areas near Kharkiv, civilian casualties in Ukraine reached 174 in May, the most in nearly a year. Civilian casualties rose 31% from April 2024. 12 people died when 2 glide bombs hit a supermarket in Kharkiv in May, and 3 people, including a 12-year-old boy and girl, were killed or severely injured when a 5-story apartment block in Novobavarsky was shelled. Russia's desperate but ruthless pressure on Ukraine includes targeting civilian infrastructure with no operational use. Russia's enormous power grid strikes on Ukraine have also increased pressure. Grid attacks seem to get better every time. Their labeling as the biggest one shows the conflict's growing intensity. The last attack occurred on June 22nd, when this footage was made. Russia attacked Ukraine's electrical system 8 times in 3 months. Ukraine's air defense system downed 12 of 16 Russian missiles and all 13 drones this time. However, the remaining missiles wounded energy workers and damaged equipment. President Zelensky claims Russia has destroyed half of Ukraine's electricity generating capability since late March. To make up for the gap, the government started buying electricity from the EU, but brutal Russian attacks made catching up impossible. The energy crisis exacerbates the humanitarian issue, making it harder for Ukrainians to deal with a persistent conflict. No end is in sight with current conditions. Putin is preparing for a long-term war that may not end in Ukraine. According to experts, as the Ukraine war escalates, its ripple effects could destabilize the region, continent, and ultimately the world. Putin's war strategy, longer war. How do we know Putin is preparing for a prolonged war? Despite his rhetoric about peace, his actions tell a different story. In May 2024, after 12 years in office, Putin dismissed his close ally, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, replacing him with economist Andrei Belousov. Why appoint an economist as defense minister? Belousov specializes in managing a war economy, ensuring Russia's military operations can endure under sanctions and economic strain. This move signals a shift in strategy, focusing on resource management for sustained conflict. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War suggest that this reshuffle, following the Russian presidential election, indicates Putin is mobilizing Russia's economy and defense industry for a protracted war in Ukraine, possibly even preparing for confrontation with NATO. Warnings of this escalation aren't new. In March 2024, General Vladimir Zhorodnitsky predicted that the Ukraine crisis could evolve from proxy conflicts into a large-scale European war. Putin's preparations underscore the Kremlin's commitment to a strategy of endurance and escalation. NATO's dilemma. NATO, the remaining front in the war, is trying to prevent a pan-European war by helping Ukraine win. However, Western efforts to help Ukraine have inadvertently escalated the conflict, creating a dilemma. Western allies were initially reluctant to provide weapons to Ukraine, fearing a wider war. It took months for the US to send HIMARS artillery and missile systems. While modern tanks only arrived nearly a year later, aid was always delayed, with Ukraine often receiving weapons after Russia had weakened it. It was not until May 2024 that Ukraine was allowed to use Western weapons to attack military targets in Crimea and the occupied territories. Meanwhile, Russia could freely attack anywhere in Ukraine, including civilian targets, without serious consequences from the West. This allowed Russia to deploy troops near the Ukrainian border and launch attacks like the one in Kharkiv. After the Kharkiv attack, the West took a more aggressive stance. Ukraine was allowed to use Western weapons in the Kharkiv Oblast, including Scalpeg and Storm Shadow missiles from France and the UK. Once approved, Ukraine quickly destroyed Russian ammunition depots and military targets, causing confusion and disrupting Russian attacks. Although many experts said the move helped de-escalate the conflict, Russia viewed it as a serious provocation. Moscow accused NATO and the US of deliberately prolonging the war, even though Russia had started the conflict, leaving behind mass graves and widespread destruction. European allies, such as France and the Baltic states, fear that Russia could threaten them if Ukraine fails. However, the deployment of NATO forces could backfire, turning the Ukraine conflict into a full-scale war on a European scale. NATO opposes sending troops to Ukraine. NATO. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said on June 6th that NATO has no intention of deploying forces in Ukraine because no ally is facing a direct military threat. Instead, Europe is focusing on sending experts to train the Ukrainian army. France is leading the way, with Lviv and Kiev likely to host French instructors. However, Russia sees this as a red line, with Foreign Minister Lavrov stating that any instructors in Ukraine are legitimate targets. After months of waiting, Ukraine has received F-16 Fighting Falcon fighter jets, a supersonic multi-role fighter built for the US Air Force. These aircraft are expected to help Ukraine regain air superiority after a long period of being dominated by Russia. The first batch of F-16s is expected to be delivered in June or July 2024, although there are rumors that the Netherlands has delivered 24s, but none have been spotted in action. The F-16s will be armed with long-range missiles from Poland, Slovenia, and Slovakia, allowing Ukraine to attack Russian military facilities, especially the Crimean airport and bridge, a vital route connecting Russia to the peninsula. If the bridge is disabled, Russia's ability to move troops and supplies into Crimea will be significantly limited, opening the door for Ukraine to retake the region. In addition to the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, and Norway have also pledged to provide F-16s, giving Ukraine 80 modern aircraft. This is a big step up from Ukraine's aging MiG-29s, Su-24, and Su-25, which have been weakened by the war. The F-16s are capable of carrying 2 9-ton bombs, 2 AIM-9 missiles, 2 AIM-120 missile, and 2 1-ton fuel tanks, along with a powerful radar system and a pilot-friendly design. Russia views the F-16s as a serious escalation and may respond harshly. Russia often views any defensive move by Ukraine as a provocation or escalation, justifying a variety of military actions that violate international law and human rights. Your predictions for the Ukraine conflict? Which scenario do you think is most likely, and what activities sparked the present escalation? Comment below and share your thoughts. Please subscribe to the channel for more content if you like it. Your support is appreciated.